Welcome to today's Cash and Treasury Management File web chat. We have three well-known consultants in Europe. David Kelin, director from his new company, Point Nine Ltd, Bas Rebel, senior director at PwC, and Adrian Rodgers, director of Financial Solutions Ltd. We're going to be discussing how to use Treasury technology more effectively. And I'd like to sort of start with a question that seems to me there's a conflict now in Treasury technology. The banks are developing far more and more technology, like Citi have just released a new version of Treasury Vision Liquidity Manager. BAM will now store 2 to 4 years of data of every bank's data if you want them to. Deutsche Bank have got app models. We've got the TMSs extending their functionality, specialist providers, and all the connectivity problems. What's the best combination of bank and non-bank and internal technologies that really work? Bas, do you want to start us off?
Well, I don't think there is a one size fits all, and that's of course a very consulting, that's a response that you would expect from a consultant, but in fact it is. Bank technology can work. Treasury management solutions that is provided by different vendors can work to a certain extent. And what I do see is that more and more companies are looking for a combination of pick and choose which part of the TMS, which part of the bank provided data they will combine into a IT treasury solution landscape.
Adrian, where are you coming from on this? Because this is a real problem.
I've taken the view for a long time that the traditional TMS, Treasury Management System vendors, have developed, both individually and when you look at them collectively, a huge amount of expertise in how Treasury processes work. So for anything that involves managing the workflow and recording the data and getting it back when you need it, those people have a tremendous amount to offer. They've also done, in my opinion, very good work in the bank connectivity space and continue to do that. But equally well, when I want an opinion on what data should be available for banks, from banks, how to get it, particularly if I'm working with a client that's running a medium to large multi-bank network, then a huge amount of that expertise is in the bank. I'm not saying the TMS providers don't understand the banking side. I'm not saying the banks don't understand treasury process. If you look at where the expertise is, it does fall into those camps. Then you add on to that the sort of markets expertise, which the banks possess, but so do the portal providers. Coming back to Bas's point, with which I absolutely agree, one size doesn't fit all. It's a question of what's the optimum mix and match for that individual client.
Building on this, David, what's the particular solution that works for, say, medium-sized corporates? Because they're very different from the global corporate.
What I see a lot of is that corporates really want to be bank independent when it comes to technology. And I kind of push, when I talk to corporates, why is that? They really don't want to be tied up to a bank with technology. And I think that's just becoming more and more prevalent. So I think I heard some of Adrian's point about, treasury management systems and independent treasury management system providers. They really know what they're doing. I mean, they understand treasury very well. And I think that's crucial, where I think corporates really want that connection. They don't want the bank necessarily providing the technology. But what they do want, I think, is the banks understanding what they're doing with regards to technology and getting involved in more of the integration. So, the downloading of bank statements, the integration to payment systems, etc. So I think that's kind of where I see corporates moving towards.
Bas, you're building or working with banks building the electronic banking services for corporates. Are they worried about corporates using them and losing their independence?
I think there is indeed in the transaction banking space a discussion about the ownership of the client and the dawn of the PSPs, and especially with the new PSD2, the successor of the Payment Service Director, that is becoming a more worry. But if I go back to David's point, I totally agree with him that that at the corporate side we do see an urgency and also a awareness that you don't want to be dependent on one bank. So the collection bank model that we have seen 10, 15 years ago, it is fading out. I'm not saying it's going to be abolished completely, but the idea that you put all your eggs in one basket, that is fading out. I believe that the banks do understand this game very well, that they can't dominate the transaction banking relationship with their corporate clients anymore. And if I see the number of cash management banks that are integrated within the Treasury environment of corporates, since the crisis, that's on the rise again.
Adrian, is this dependence on banks a concern?
I think it has been for a long time. I think in this context, which is the technology context, I think corporates are torn because area which certainly the larger, more competent banks have come to produce really impressive systems with really impressive capabilities. But corporates, for all sorts of reasons external to technology, are already very dependent on many of the banks that they use, so I don't think they want any more. So they want the benefit of the bank's knowledge, and we'll seek to access that. But I agree with the analysis that they certainly don't want to embed it at a level which means that they can't change banks. But also the other thing that we've seen over the last few years, which didn't used to be a feature of the landscape, is banks initiating the rupture with the corporate. So it's not just the corporate who wishes to exit the relationship. It happens even to some very large corporates that some of their banks may turn around and say, I'm not making enough from you, and I want to sever the relationship. In that situation, you really, really wouldn't want to be technology dependent on your bank.
Yeah, some of the technology that banks are coming up with is quite stunningly effective and useful. How do you manage this, David?
Just make one point on the banks with regard to technology and what they're doing. I think one of the things I hear customers or clients of mine saying, or corporates talking about the link to banks and the way that they want to be quite bank independent when it comes to Treasury, is they want to be able to move banks more easily. And I think being tied into the bank's technology makes that move more difficult. So again, bank independence in terms of technology is positive in that direction, I think. I guess one of the things that I don't know if you've mentioned, anybody's mentioned it on the call, is mobile payments and in terms of where banks are going with regards to that is something that's quite exciting, and I think banks making a lot of inroads into mobile payments and mobile technology with regards to it, but mainly from an app point of view rather than really getting embedded technology. And I think it's the embedded technology that's worries a lot of corporates as to when it comes to bank providing that.
Bas, do you want to come in again?
Yeah, I think that David makes some good remarks here. I think it's even so from a technology perspective, corporates are looking for becoming independent, partly because the switching cost, but I guess it's also part of it should also be part of the strategy of getting access to liquidity. banks do realize that they can't dominate the funding relationship with the corporates, and that reciprocity in fee-earning business is the flip side of that same coin. And corporates are building on this, and they understand, and and if they don't understand, they should understand that very clearly. Is that if you want to have new entrants to your syndicates, or you want to have set up new bank loans with new banks, then the reciprocity in the fee-earning business is partly, of course, FX and other nice banking products, but cash management is low capital intensive business to distribute fee-earning business to the banks. And if you have an open platform that can connect to multiple banks in an easy way, it helps you to attract more banks to your funding structure.
Okay, if we move on and look at Treasury is seeming to move towards trying to focus on enterprise treasury, enterprise-wide treasury, rather than just within the department. And all the processes and systems that contribute to the overall corporate treasury efficiency are now being viewed by the corporate treasury. They may not be responsible completely, but they try and influence it. The problem is that, as you said, Adrian, too often they're still relying on spreadsheets to do a lot of the work. If we take two particular examples, cash flow forecasting, how can you break out of the Excel dependence? What new combinations do you see working?
Although I hate Excel in Treasury, personally and professionally, I'm prepared to make an exception in the case of cash flow forecasting. There are aspects of cash flow forecasting for which Excel is ideal, not least because Excel is fundamentally a two-dimensional columns and rows, and strangely enough, so is the average cash flow forecast. However, you remain with the problem of error, potential error, and also the problem of communications. And if you rely for your communications between business units and Treasury, which is obviously, I think we'd all agree, the potentially volatile, but also most rewarding area of cash flow forecasting. If you rely on sending Excel spreadsheets as attachments to emails, which then have to be, worst case, cut and pasted into the aggregate forecast, mistakes are going to be made, and sometimes they won't be easy to spot. So in my view, any solution that gives you a columns and rows format, but also embeds some degree of security and some degree of communications to get the data from where it's prepared into the summary forecast in Treasury, that is going to, however unsophisticated a solution like that is going to have a value, and therefore anybody with a distributed cash flow forecasting problem should be looking at potentially one of the TMS packages that supports those things, or one of the standalone vendors.
There are standalone sort of spreadsheet type packages available now.
That's right. But the trouble is we tend to focus on the mechanics of the forecasting rather than the how do we collect the data from where it is aspect. And I actually think that's one of the more dangerous aspects. Now, I'm aware that that's a conventional view. I'd like to hear the other guys' input on that.
Bas, where are you coming from on forecasting? I know you spend a lot of time doing it.
Well, you're setting up this discussion, of course, and setting us up to some antagonism. I think, and this is my biggest issue for many years now, I think that corporates are not very creative in producing better solutions for cash flow forecasting. The traditional way is indeed going out to the financial controllers of the across the enterprise, have them collect something in Excel and then aggregate that information. Whereas I believe Treasury should go into the source systems directly, collect the data from the systems, the source systems, and do the statistical analysis themselves. It is an entirely different approach than I would say 95%, if not 99% of all corporates are taking when it comes to cash flow forecasting. So I would advocate that that corporates would need to take a fresher look at the way they are approaching cash flow forecasting. Not take it incremental improvement on how to connect these spreadsheets, but really take a different approach to how to collect and number crunch the source.
David, can you hear enough of that to comment?
Talk to corporates. They're really forecasting for them is really an issue of getting their entities to, first of all, submit the forecasts, and then getting them to be accurate, getting them to do it on time, and then looking at the way they analyze the forecast. And I think it's kind of as simple as that. And you either forecast well or you don't forecast at all, because getting it wrong is too dangerous. And I think this is the problem. So I mean, traditionally, when you've got sort of netting products that allow entities to send information from the entity to the Treasury Centre, that's ideal. That sort of product is ideal for forecasting, because that's exactly what they want to do. They want to be able to send a forecast to the Treasury Centre, collect the forecast, and then analyse them. And I think it's quite exciting that there are new products coming on. There's a couple of just cash forecast systems that are now available, independent to even treasury management systems. I think a lot of the problems around forecasting really relates to the company itself, in terms of how they can really structure the forecasts to be available, and to be available where they want them to be, and to be adequate in terms of just the efficiency of the forecast and the accuracy of the forecast. And I think that's really the problem. The tools really are just how it's done. And that's
okay. If we move to another area which is clearly linked to cash flow forecasting, it's cash visibility. Are there any things that are coming out that are essential to do? Adrian, do you want to start us off?
Well, this is an area that continually surprises me, because I thought the visibility issues were taken care of years ago by the bank technology, MT940s, etc. It seems to me, though, over all these years working with clients on this topic, that some clients have been quick and focused and in taking advantage of what's available in terms of what their banks can report. And others, I have to be honest, have been slow and not very focused, and seem to accept a very low benchmark for success. I mean, when I'm working with clients on this topic, my view is that the target for cash visibility should be 100% on the treasurer's or CFO's desk by he or she starts work the following morning.
Absolutely.
Whereas
how are we going to achieve that?
I have clients who tolerate 60 or 70% of all balances reported up to several weeks later.
Bas.
Yeah, I agree with Adrian that 100% should be the benchmark, and it's not so difficult to reach that, because banks are indeed very capable of sending the bank statements overnight to wherever you want to have them, whether it's SWIFT or to a collection bank. I think what a lot of companies are struggling with is basically two things. First of all, it's if you present it just as cash visibility and collecting bank statements of hundreds of bank accounts, there's a cost aspect to it. And secondly, It is about, and you can basically say, look, why would you collect something decentralized if you can also do it centrally, and then use it for both local and treasury services? And that's the approach that I would typically advocate to my clients, saying, look, build yourself the case for a bank connectivity hub on top of the payment factory in-house banking solution, collect everything centrally, and then copy the information that's necessary to the local source system. So then connectivity is on this kind of bank statement collections is part of the Treasury IT infrastructure, and you can have central IT also manage the distribution and the upload of the bank statements in the local ERP systems. And here you see how technology is not just an atomic view on the treasury management solution of one of the well-known TMS vendors. No, it is about a integrated IT landscape covering ERP, TMS, bank connectivity, integration to a FX portal, etc., etc. So that best of breed, it's more about integration than functionality within one system.
Okay, David.
Just to comment on cash visibility, I think since the liquidity crisis, this has just become even more important. It always has been important, but it's become even more important. And I heard Adrian talking about getting 100% visibility. I mean, to be honest, that's exactly what everybody should have. You know, the technology is there to do it. Banks should be able to produce and be able to send files, whatever they are, balance statements to corporates as and when they want them. And I think that to getting visibility, to be able to put a treasurer in it, to give them their total cash position is really the first step to really anything that treasurer wants to do. And I think the fact that some banks can't do it or some that's just not being done is not good anymore, because its technology is there to be able to do that, and it is really, really, really important. I think that, again, it goes back to the interconnection and the bringing banks and bringing technology together is really key.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all three of you. But before we finish, can you very briefly give me a idea or a insight that you've come across recently that you went, that's interesting? Adrian, do you want to start us off on this?
In the technology area specifically, I think it was actually related to one of your CTMfile entries recently that you drew my attention to, which was the evolution, the further evolution of the single bank FX platform. I think a lot of us had been assuming that the single bank model was dying, particularly at the high end under the onslaught of the multi-bank portals. The fact that there's life and there's value in the single bank portal, I think was, and we can see that by some of the investment that's going in. I think certainly in the last 2 weeks, that's been the biggest surprise to me.
Bas, how about you?
Yeah, well, we talked about cash flow forecasting. That's my biggest theme when it comes to technology and the use of, or basically the lack of use of computing power to get it right. But just to mention one other topic, because it has relationship to bank technology and cash management products, I think Treasury should really keep an eye on the developments around BEPS. That is the new OECD guidelines on fiscal treatment and transfer pricing. That is a dossier that will have a big impact on Treasury in the future, from the point of view from transfer pricing and location for Treasury operations.
Okay, and finally, David.
Just on the technology front, I think what's quite interesting, and I think we're going to see more and more of, are applications that allow treasuries to provide the information that they produce. So, for example, perhaps cash forecasting, perhaps cash positions to other people outside Treasury. So I think we're going to see a growth of, I guess, dashboards, so that the Treasury management system, rather than keeping the users of the Treasury management system within Treasury, but allowing access to that information via an application or a dashboard to other people within the organization. I think that's beginning to happen. So through graphical representation, graphs, etc., and diagrams, through perhaps iPhones, through apps, and all of that. I think there's a real growth area there. So spreading the information from Treasury outwards to other parts of the organization where it's of interest to them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all three of you. And we're all going to be in Eurofinance next week in Budapest. Hopefully we can pick up on some of these topics then.